On September 21, 1959, in a negotiation room in Washington, a Soviet diplomat placed an ordinary jar of glue on the table. What happened next would forever change a multi-million-dollar industry. Silence fell over the room. The American businessmen were in shock. But let's start from the beginning. Picture this scene: the mid-50s, the Cold War in full swing. The Berlin Wall divides Europe, the space race is just beginning, and two superpowers are competing in literally everything. And in this atmosphere of global confrontation, an unexpected battle unfolds. Over glue. Yes, glue. Because without it, you couldn't build a jet aircraft, a spacecraft, or even ordinary furniture. This story began back in 1912, when German chemist Fritz Klatt accidentally discovered a substance with unique adhesive properties. He called it polyvinyl acetate, or PVA for short. Klatt was a typical scientist of his time. He made the discovery, conducted a few experiments at home, and forgot about it. He couldn't even imagine that his invention would become the subject of international trade wars. The chemist continued working modestly in a small laboratory, and during the war, he lost all his notes when his lab was bombed. Klatt died in 1950, never knowing about the boom his glue would create. But an American entrepreneur named Farben proved more farsighted. He saw the commercial potential of the German invention, improved the formula, bought the rights, and in the late 30s launched production at the facilities of chemical giant Monsanto. This was a real breakthrough in the chemical industry. No longer was it necessary to use traditional glues made from animal materials. Monsanto was already the largest chemical conglomerate by that time. Founded in 1901, it controlled the production of numerous chemical products, but PVA became a particularly profitable line. The cost of a kilogram of glue was $1. The selling price was $20. The USSR bought hundreds of tons annually, bringing the company millions of dollars in profit. With this money, Monsanto financed new research and expanded production. Naturally, when rumors of Soviet plans to establish their own production reached company management, serious concern began. While the Americans developed their profitable business, the situation with adhesives in the USSR was complicated. The only quality glue was BF, invented by Professor Petrov in 1942. But there was a problem. The glue thickened quickly when exposed to air. To increase shelf life, manufacturers began diluting it, sometimes in ratios of 1:3 or even 1:4. Working with such diluted glue was inconvenient. It held poorly, cracked, and required long drying times. Soviet workers ironically called it Boris Fedorovich. By the mid-50s, Soviet leadership made a decision: obtain the technology for PVA production. And here begins the most interesting part of the story. The formula and production technology for the glue were obtained through industrial espionage, a common practice during the Cold War. One of the Monsanto plant employees passed the recipe to Soviet representatives. Industrial espionage was a widespread phenomenon on both sides. Each superpower sought to gain an advantage in technology. But obtaining the recipe turned out to be only half the battle. At a research institute near Moscow, the complex process of reproducing American technology began. They had the recipe, but the devil was in the details. Exact temperature, pressure, reaction time. Everything had to be determined experimentally. The first batches turned out unsuccessful, either too liquid or set solid. Researchers worked in 3 shifts without days off. The breakthrough came when they checked the quality of raw materials. It turned out the Americans used ultra-pure vinyl acetate, while Soviet equivalents contained impurities up to 0.5%. Young chemist Igor Sokolov conducted a detailed analysis and discovered that micro-impurities of organic acids played a key role. They had to build additional purification facilities, but the result justified the costs. Soviet PVA turned out to be no less quality than the American version. Moreover, researchers were able to make it more heat-resistant. The Americans quickly learned of this success. Monsanto's intelligence network in Europe worked efficiently. Within 3 months, company headquarters knew about Soviet achievements. And then real corporate drama began. The board of directors convened an emergency session. Chairman Edgar Queenie was extremely concerned. According to participants' recollections, the atmosphere was tense. Losing the Soviet market threatened serious losses. Company lobbyists became active in Congress and the Senate. They demanded restrictions on chemical component supplies to the USSR and revision of trade agreements. Some proposals reached absurdity, almost to suggestions of war with the USSR, but a trade war could indeed have erupted. The figures were impressive. According to Monsanto's annual report for 1957, PVA sales to the USSR and allied countries totaled 847 tons, worth $16.2 million. Enormous money for those times. Net profit reached 78% of turnover. The company calculated potential losses. If the USSR began its own production, losses would amount to at least $50 million over 5 years. And if the Soviet side began exporting to socialist bloc countries, losses could reach $200 million. This money was planned to be invested in building new plants and developing new polymers. Disruption of plans threatened serious consequences for the company. The situation required a solution, and it came in 1959 when Khrushchev visited the USA. That's when the famous scene with the jar of glue occurred. The Soviet trade mission and company representatives met at the negotiating table in Washington. The meeting took place on September 21, 1959, in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce building. The Soviet delegation was headed by Deputy Minister of Foreign Trade Nikolai Patalichev, the American delegation by Monsanto Vice President Charles Thomas. The atmosphere was tense. American businessmen in expensive suits at the negotiating table, documents with serious sums for licensing. Interpreters worked nervously with papers. The American side expected to receive maximum compensation for use of their technology. Monsanto demanded $25 million for a full license plus 15% royalties on each kilogram of glue produced. For those times, these were astronomical sums. And then came the turning point of the negotiations. Patalichev calmly took an ordinary glass jar with white viscous liquid from his briefcase and placed it on the table. The jar had a label reading Sample Number 47, Research Institute 6, Top Secret. The Americans initially didn't understand the meaning of this gesture. Then Thomas took the jar, examined the contents. This was their own PVA, or a very high-quality copy. Gentlemen, we have already mastered this technology and can produce glue in necessary quantities, Patalichev calmly announced through the interpreter. The question is whether you are ready for a reasonable agreement on patent compensation or prefer competition in the market. The situation changed dramatically. Monsanto's monopoly position was under threat. Thomas requested a break for consultations with management. The negotiations took on a completely different character, and ultimately the parties reached a compromise. $2.5 million as a lump sum and abandonment of royalties. However, with an important condition, the USSR could produce PVA only for domestic consumption without export rights. This suited both parties. Soviet industry got the necessary glue, and Monsanto preserved international markets. Mass production of PVA in the USSR began in the late 60s to early 70s. Initially, all glue went to state needs, to industry and defense. Ordinary citizens still used Boris Fedorovich in homemade glues. The appearance of domestic PVA truly revolutionized many industries. In the space program, PVA was used for thermal protection coatings. The furniture industry gained the ability to produce quality plywood and particle board. In construction, PVA began being added to mortars and putties. When PVA finally appeared in stores for ordinary buyers, it cost pennies and was available in any quantities. By that time, new, more advanced glues had already appeared in the world, and the PVA story became part of the past. Polyethylene terephthalate proved to be a material beyond time, countries, and ideologies. Its discovery resulted from the efforts of scientists from different nations: British, American, Soviet. Each contributed to what has become the foundation of modern textile and packaging industry. This story shows how geopolitics influenced even the most ordinary goods during the Cold War. A simple jar of glue became a symbol of the technological confrontation of the era.